There are about 7 or 10 classic features. And again, I've made some videos about those. But in your case, there's one I wanted to mention because it's specific to relationships. And it's something called a satellite feature. And it's important, particularly given your situation, to understand how this plays out. Generally speaking, it's a tendency where one person literally revolve around another person. And they become deferential, they become subservient. They begin to exist through the other person, really to exist almost for the other person, and in doing so, derive a feeling of identity for themselves. So there's this tendency to revolve around, just like a satellite, or like a moon revolving around a planet, or a planet revolving around a sun. It's now dependent. And in human psychology and in human behavior, the way this usually manifests is in the form of one, imitation. One person will just start to imitate what the other person is doing. They'll start to follow the same diet. They'll start to wear the same clothes. They'll start to show interest in the same things. Another way it will manifest is in the form of submission. They'll just do whatever the other person wants them to do. They'll become deferential. They won't make their own decisions. They'll always defer to the other person. It will seem like a wonderful relationship to them because they're getting a sense of fulfillment, but they're not getting it from themselves. It's all being derived through the relationship to and the dependence on another person. Normally, the dynamic that puts this into play is that one person will have a very active feature, and the other person will tend to have more of a passive feature. And this dynamic sets up a chemistry whereby it's very easy for one person to revolve around the other, and for both people to derive a sense of psychological comfort from that relationship. But in most cases, this satellite feature, this tendency and the way it manifests can be seen in human behavior. And it raises the question, what is really going on at the core beneath the manifestation, the operation of this tendency to be a satellite and revolve around and be submissive to and always defer to and imitate another person? In many instances, what's happening is that the submissive party, playing the role of the satellite, doesn't have a clear sense of their own being. They don't know their own being. Their own being does not know itself, and it's uncertain of itself. It doesn't trust itself. It doesn't know how to have an existence of its own. And so it very quickly derives a sense of being, of existence, of value from someone else and through someone else. And it attaches to the other person and fuels its own sense of identity from this other person. And instead of coexisting in a healthy relationship, the person begins to exist for and through the other person. You see this in male and female relationships. You see it in male to male and female to female relationships, where one person is really sort of giving up their own existence. But what's most harmful is they're giving up their own sense of being at the core of themselves. They're surrendering it because they don't know any better. And they think that they are gaining something through this deferential relationship, but they're really just existing through the other person. And inevitably, even though it may take years for it to be realized, often this kind of deference, it's a form of sacrifice, and it will inevitably lead to resentment. And it can lead to resentment on both sides, but more often it will lead to resentment in the person who's playing the role of the satellite, because they will come to see at some point that in fact they're not getting full satisfaction, that they are reliant, that they are dependent, that they are simply revolving around another person, and that they've been sacrificing themselves unwittingly, thinking that it felt good, but only coming to understand that that is not the way to discover your own sense of being. It's not necessarily easy to pull oneself out of the orbit of another person. You see this often portrayed in cinema. You see it in marriages, in relationships. You see how difficult it is for one person to pull themselves away. There's a strong gravitational psychological pull. There's a whole sense of identity at work, an entire amalgamation of the feeling of me, of I, that has become invested in another person. And it can be painful and difficult and confusing, even bewildering, to pull away from that and start to exist for oneself. Because then the question becomes, how do I exist for myself, as myself? And not as a person. This is what often happens. Study this or do that in order to exist for myself. Yes, those things can be useful. Those things can all help. Someone will be going through this and they'll think, well, how do I exist for myself? And they're thinking of themselves in terms of a person. But the real question is, how do I exist for myself as conscious awareness? And this is really a question for everyone, because we can say that awareness, consciousness, is almost always revolving around the body and mind. It's always existing in relation to the body and mind, in relation to our thoughts, in relation to our feelings, in relation to our sensations, in relation to our life. And it's always deferring, you could say, to these. It's deferring to us as a person, and it's submitting itself and really sacrificing itself to this feeling of identity as a person. And it has no independent life of its own. And this is what spiritual awakening is. It is awareness realizing its independent existence as awareness, not in form, not in relation to form, and not through form, but as itself, as its own realization of pure being. Ultimately, this is where someone who has a tendency toward being a satellite would hope to reach, to come to this realization. It's not simply to be my own person and now I need to go and develop my own interests and join a church or a club or a group or an organization or a friend's circle, and those things aren't necessarily a problem, but they still don't get to the core. And the core is awareness realizing itself and existing as itself without having to depend on anything or anyone for its own being.